All right. Good evening. Welcome everybody to the August session of the Southern Fried .NET Users Group. We are thrilled to be coming to you from here, the Microsoft campus here in Charlotte, North Carolina. We are located here in the Carolinas, but the Southern Fried DNN User Group is for everybody. Sure, we're for the Southeast, but we've got Joe joining us. We've got Cassidy joining us. We are a DNN-focused user group that love to see everybody. So come join us online, and thank you to everybody who's joining us both here in person and also online. Tonight we've got a mix of things to talk about. I think that in general we're starting to see the summer wind down. People are thinking about the fall and ramping up DNN-related projects. We've got clients asking for more stuff. Somewhere around November they'll wake up and remember that the end of the year is coming. So we're looking forward to all of that. But it's time for us to talk about a lot of other things community-wise. There's been some great motion regarding the next DNN convention, and we're going to be hearing from Cassidy in just a few minutes about that. David Poindexter is going to be talking with us about David Poindexter is going to be talking to us about updates with the nvQuickSite. And then our main speaker of the evening is Joe Brinkman. We're going to have him give a recap of the webinar that he gave earlier this morning for DNN and Microservices. I'll give an introduction to that when we get started with it, but we're going to do a brief recap of that and then really do a deep dive into whatever piques our interest, whatever questions that we brought with us. We'll do a little bit more Q&A and kind of dive deeper into code and see some of the awesome things that Joe had to leave out of the webinar for time this morning. A couple of housekeeping things to mention. If I mentioned just to begin with the Microsoft location, we do have to thank Michael, our sponsor, who helps us be in this fantastic location, and we appreciate that. I do mention that our sponsor for the night is JetBrains. We offer we have to thank them. They are one of the sponsors that help makes things happen here for Southern Fried, and they also provide us with fantastic giveaways. And tonight, at the end of the meeting, we have a couple of giveaways for a JetBrains license, which some folks in the room have already won. If you haven't won it, it is your pick of one of their applications and a license for that. So it's a pretty valuable, exciting giveaway. So make sure to stay on towards the end of the meeting so that we can have you in the running for that. Just running through the meeting notes. Let me.
And Ryan,
yes.
That is available to online attendees as well. So
absolutely.
Don't think you need to be present to win.
Absolutely. We need to make sure you stay around to the end of the meeting so that we can you can be present when we have done that raffle at the end of the meeting. Community buzz and announcements. Clint is about a minute away, and I was going to check in with Clint for community announcements and things. So for the moment, since he's still tied up in traffic, we're going to skip to the next item for the meeting, which is to hear I think the first official announcement of the DNN Summit, the upcoming conference in January 2017. If you haven't already seen, the new website has been released and information is out there. And we have a lot of exciting new information regarding this that is going to be brought to us directly from Cassidy, who's the head of organizing this event. So Cassidy, let me pass it over to you. Would you like for me to share screen with you, or what would you like to do?
Sure, I guess I'll bring up the site, or if you want to leave it on your computer, I could just go through yours. I don't know how my internet's working.
All right, then we'll stay over here and you go.
Okay, sounds good. So I guess the key things are the dates. It's January 18th to the 23rd. The conference itself is 3 days. Changes that we've made, obviously the name is now DNN Summit. So we've kind of evolved DNN Con to DNN Summit. That's come along with a new logo And the idea with that is right now we have mountains up top, but that picturesque item element will be changing based on location just to create a little uniqueness for each event. And then along with those changes, we have shifted it to be a weekday conference. So we're going to be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Wednesday is going to start off with a half-day code-a-thon in the afternoon, and Joe and DNN Corp will be kind of heading up the direction of that code-a-thon. That will also flow into Thursday, which will be full-day code-a-thon during the training sessions. Training sessions will be their typical 3 subject matters that we usually have, but we've added an intro to DNN for those who really just need the basic overview of how to add a module, how to do user permissions, all the basic DNN stuff. And then we've added a half-day business roundtable event that is pretty much open to anyone and everyone, and we encourage participation to come and share ideas and challenges and you know, opinions on the platform and that kind of thing. And then that will go to Friday, where we're doing our kind of sessions, and those look like they'll probably begin around 8 in the morning, go till 6:30 in the evening. And we will be doing social events both Thursday night and Friday night. That will be included in the conference package. Location-wise, it's right in downtown Denver. It's going to be easy to get to, fly into DIA, and there is a train that goes right from DIA into Union Station, which is only a couple blocks from the hotel, so you'll be able to take a free shuttle bus up to the hotel. So transportation shouldn't be an issue. You probably won't need a vehicle if you're flying in from out of town. Let's see, what else do we have going on? Oh, the DNN on the slope, so that's the fun part.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, so we're finalizing pricing and packages on that, but I think we've identified an actual lodging opportunity, which will be condo-based, so find a friend or friends to share lodging if you want to be social. And then we'll do that Saturday. We're hoping to get a bus sponsor to charter people up from downtown Denver to Winter Park. It's about an hour-and-a-half drive. And then that afternoon on Saturday we'll be doing tubing, and this isn't your grandma's tubing, so if you're scared, maybe make an excuse and show up a little late. But anyways, and then afterwards we'll do après tubing, which is happy hour, and looking at doing that into the package price, so a couple of drinks, appetizers, and then you'll be picking up going skiing or snowboarding, and you need those. And then Sunday we'll either do skiing or snowmobiling as option for folks, and then an après ski again with some drinks and appetizers. And then unfortunately it's Monday and it's time for everyone to go home.
Yeah.
So probably, I know pricing right now is a question, but we're trying to keep all the activities and the social events for the DNN on the slopes under $200 for the package, and then lodging will be independent. And so, and then I guess sponsors right now, we have some committed sponsors that are up on the website, so definitely thank those folks. But we have Managed, 10 Pound Gorilla, Envisionate, Gravity Works, Iowa Computer Gurus, and Desk Pals, I think. Hopefully I'm not missing somebody. And we're just talking with a couple other folks and to get those people up and involved. So if you guys know anybody who's interested, we have all levels of sponsorship or even donations for giveaways. And speakers are our big thing right now. We were able to secure Scott Hanselman as our keynote speaker, so we're super excited about that. And we're looking for kind of new blood in the speaking arena, and it doesn't mean if you're old blood we don't want you to, but we want to try to get broader topics that are relative to people within the DNN space, but that might attract people in more general web development, so potentially we can get them to our conference and introduce them to the DNN platform. So we want kind of things all outside the box. So on the website you'll find suggested areas or topics of interest, and right now we're not identifying tracks like we've traditionally done in the past, to hopefully again spur more current topics and trends in the space and get the right people speaking and sharing their information. What else am I missing? I have a couple other people that are helping put this together. So Clint, Ryan, Dave, what am I missing?
Speakers and sponsors you covered. Those are the main things that we need to get people chiming in about right now.
I mean, did you say about the cutoff date, the 16th?
No, cutoff dates, Cassidy.
Oh, okay. So for the speaker submissions, we're doing that. It's September 16th, I think. Yes. And we have our early bird pricing, so that's another change we've made in the conference. And I know the conference traditionally has been free in the past, but in order to grow the conference and cover those expenses and then also add these additional enhancements, there's more money that's necessary. So we've attached, what we feel is fair and huge value, some attendance fee there. So early bird pricing, which is 50% off, ends October 22nd. So that gives you some time to make your travel plans and do that, but we encourage everyone to try to get registered early so we have better numbers and save you money. And we hope to have our speaker selection out in time prior to that early bird pricing expiring, so you can kind of see the full agenda of what's going on.
Cassidy, just a personal question on travel, opinion here. Do you have a sense of whether it's cheaper to wait until the very last minute and book airfare, or go ahead and do so 4 months out in advance? Yeah.
I mean, the good news for most people is Denver's an international airport and a hub for a lot of airlines, so it's fairly affordable to fly into. Mm-hmm. I've been personally noticing that there's crazy deals, at least flying out of Denver, so I don't know if it's the same reciprocal, but I've been looking at a couple different locations for different reasons and finding round-trip tickets under $200. So I would encourage people to look right now, and if it does seem like a great deal, scoop it up. I definitely would say booking 2.5 to 3 months out, you're going to get that prime rate. As you start to get closer, it will go up.
David chimed in on the chat, he has joined us now in person, that it's just $293 coming out of Raleigh, North Carolina. So coming out of the edge of East Coast here, looks like right under $300 round trip.
About 500 About 500.
Really? Raleigh versus Charlotte? Sure.
Because of the dominated.
All right. Well, so Clint, David, you guys have any other additions to add in to the DNN Summit? No, not yet. He's got to be quiet. Cassidy, well, thank you.
Sorry.
It's a mute button right there. Okay, so audio problems, something all the time. Cassidy, thank you for joining us, here tonight for just the intro. I think that as we get closer, I'd probably say if we don't get text notes and updates every month as we get closer, I'd love to have you back on every other month just so you can tell us how it's shaping up, what's new, and kind of have a spot to encourage people and get them excited about what's new and coming for DNN Summit. Myself personally, I've been looking forward to having a West Coast or Central side DNN conference for a while, and I have several folks and colleagues and friends that haven't been able to make it out here East Coast. So I'm looking forward to running across new folks that haven't been there yet to a DNN Con, or at least one of the last 3 or 4, and I'm really excited about heading over.
Well, thanks for the time, and yeah, definitely, if we have updates and I take up a little time and share it with everybody, that's awesome, because it's easier to hear summed up in a little video than to read through everything sometimes.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Cassie. David, I'm going to give you a few more minutes to keep getting set up. No, wait, you ready to go now? No. I'm going to give you a few minutes to get set up. We'll bookend and bring you back on in a few minutes. What we're going to do now is move over to Joe, talk about his webinar from this morning and get ready to get into a catch-up for the a recap of the topic from this morning, which was DNN and microservices. For those who weren't aware or who weren't able to catch it earlier, noon our time, 9 a.m. California time, Joe Brinkman gave a presentation, which we've heard some similar things recently. In DNN Connect, there was a microservices presentation. There have been a few new things that have posted in the last few months on the website and in blog posts, and I was encouraged to see the continuity of theme that Joe presented at DNNCon Baltimore, and then he presented with us in a session doing DNN out of the box and talking about ways to use and think about DNN in a wider approach to be your workhorse, to be your brains for more than just your website and more than that's just in that DNN box. And his presentation and his direction on microservices fits directly into that. And so I enjoyed catching the rest of that message. It's almost as though the out-of-the-box session, which we have, and there are video links that you can watch on the SoFri website. The DNN out-of-the-box challenged you to think about doing more with DNN, and the microservices webinar, which you can catch in the corporate site webinar location, and we'll post some links in this meeting recap, continues on and says how to do those things. Think out of the box with DNN and how to make it happen. So with that as an introduction, Joe, I will let you share screen and turn the screens over to you.
Thanks, Ryan. Even though I'm kind of confused here because I've got two David Poindexters on my screen and I'm not sure who's who.
I'm also
yes. So let's go ahead and I'm just gonna. This is really going to be an abbreviated form of what I covered this morning. And so really we're going to talk about microservices, and we're going to drill down maybe a little deeper level technology-wise than I was able to drill down into this morning. A little less of the fluff, a little less of the slideshow, and more of the tech side, because there's a lot of other pieces. An hour is really not enough time to really, get into the meat of microservices. There's a lot to learn there. But effectively what we were talking about this morning was we're talking about the way you traditionally build web apps and the way we traditionally have looked at building DNN. And for a long time, DNN has been built as what's called a monolith. And effectively all of your code runs inside of a single server process. And that means a lot of things. That presents a lot of challenges for you. You end up with tight coupling. Now I know that nobody has ever seen this before, but those modules that sometimes take a really tight dependency on the exact layout of a table, and if the table changes and the module breaks, and that is one of those symptoms that you see in traditional monoliths where you start seeing this coupling that was never really intended to be there, and people figure, well, I need to access this data directly to do something with it, and the minute they do that, then they've just become coupled to however that data was structured before. Or they start calling and taking advantage of APIs which were never intended to be public, or they take advantage of bugs and other things in APIs, and they do things in a way that what ends up happening is little changes or corrections or fixes in the application then start causing problems with modules. Or you have one part of DNN that you fix a bug in and something somewhere else suddenly breaks, and it's because there was some coupling there that you weren't aware of. And really in monoliths, even though you put stuff in place when you first start developing the architecture, over time some of those separations start breaking down, and it causes problems and growing pains. And we've seen that a lot the last couple of years. The second item is around scaling. Now, what I talked about in my session this morning is that if you've ever done web farms with DNN, you know that in order to scale DNN, you effectively have to scale the entire application. So not just the application, but all of the modules that are installed in the application. And not just the application and the modules and the code, but you also have to figure out how to scale things like the cache and how to scale file access. And all of these things become harder and harder as you scale up the system, because you're now having to carry some of this baggage because all of these things are in this monolith. And deployment becomes much harder as you start scaling up, as you start having to figure out, okay, if I scale and add another server in my web farm, what does that do in terms of keeping all these servers in sync? What does that do in terms of every time I need to update the system, then it means that I have to update multiple webheads. And then finally, the single language. And you know, we've run into this a little bit. A great example of this in DNN today is with the search engine that we use in DNN, which is based on nLucine, which is a great, or Lucene.net, which is a great search engine. The challenge is that Lucene.net is a couple of versions behind the original Java version of Lucene. And it would be nice to be able to run that, the original Java version against your code or against the content, right? And it's like, because of the language challenges and the monolith that we have today, things like that become very difficult to do. So you end up not doing them. You end up saying, well, we'll live with a search engine that's maybe a couple versions or a couple revs back, because it's too hard to bring in a Java environment in a .NET application. So when building microservices, we really are looking at how do we solve some of these challenges. And there are a number of principles that we use in microservices. And one is to keep each microservice small. Typically, now this is something that in modules, we're kind of used to this. We're used to modules being focused on one small challenge, right? You build a module to do forums, or you build a module to do content management, or you build a module to do just a slider on, you know, for your home page, right? So we're used to this principle of keeping things small and focused on solving one particular problem for a module. And if you need to solve multiple problems, then you probably deploy multiple modules. They can all be part of a suite, but generally they get built out as separate modules so that you have greater control on the page. Messaging enabled, and really all this means is that we use traditional web technologies to make our APIs sort of a message-based API. So where we pass in an object to an API and we get an object back, or we get some data back, or we get a resource back, whatever that thing is that that API presents to us. In some cases, we may choose the method for calling this service may actually be to use a service bus or a messaging bus for passing that message in and for getting data back out. But effectively, whether it's a web service or service bus, it's really about this messaging type of API service. Bounded scopes, i.e., What you want to do when you're building microservices is really only have one reason for the microservice to ever change. And that one reason is really about focusing on a single capability, focusing on a single feature, and that becomes the entire boundary of your microservice. When you start seeing that that definitions of terms within your domain or within your bounded context start changing depending on how it's being used, then that's a fairly clear signal that you've gone beyond that initial scope, and you probably need to look at decomposing what you're building into multiple separate microservices. Or maybe you have a portion of your microservice that you can look at and say, you know what, this is a fairly isolated bit of code, and I can see that over time this is going to become more complex, and over time I may need to scale this piece independently from some other bit of code. So that would also be another way that you might bound the scope of that and say maybe this thing needs to be externalized into a separate microservice itself. Autonomous development, and this really speaks to that problem about single language. This speaks to finding the right tool for the job to deliver a particular microservice. So if the best search engine is one written in Java and it's Lucene, then you should just be able to use Lucene and wrap it in a service and use that within your application. You really shouldn't have to use a port if that's not the appropriate thing. Autonomous really speaks to not driving the development of your application, but rather letting each microservice sort of do what is necessary for that microservice. Independently deployed. Now this is something that we've kind of are used to within the DNN world, where you can deploy individual modules and you can version and rev them independently. Unfortunately, because they're all still running inside an individual process, they're not truly independent, i.e., as soon as I install a module, it's necessarily going to do an application restart or an app pool restart on DNN, which means your caches all have to be flushed and refilled, and you still have that startup time. So there are other things there which make modules not truly independent from a deployment perspective, and that's what you're really looking for. One of the things that I really have loved about working with microservices, as we've iterated over the last couple of months on some of the microservices we deliver in Evoke 8.5, the interesting thing is you don't have to do a new install of Evoke. You update the microservice and suddenly you get these new capabilities which just light up in your application. You may have seen this if you've ever worked with the Azure portal, where one go in there and there's just this new thing available. It's the same whether you go on, some place like Yahoo website, or you go to Amazon, or you go to, a lot of websites. You just go there and suddenly new things just light up. Well, with DNN, traditionally that's meant you've had to do some upgrades or go through some steps in your application, and with microservices you sort of avoid that step because that deployment happens separately in the cloud and just for that one service that you're doing the upgrade.
Joe, when you get to showing some examples, and maybe you're going to bring on screen one of the same ones you did earlier, which was the Evoke 8.5, where you were talking about how microservices are used in some spots. One question that I was going to ask was, you've talked about the reasons for microservices, the benefits or the problems that you're trying to solve to address through microservices. The direction there within Evoke to use microservices in this format, what was the driving factor or desire there? Was it speed and independence of load? Was it like what you were just mentioning, the fact that it's independent so that you can fix or change and play with one without affecting the rest? What was the drive there?
Yeah, there were a couple of things there. One was we really wanted to be able to deliver new features much faster to customers and new enhancements and fixes within the code base to customers. Right now, as you know, one of the challenges that we have with DNN and with Evoke is that whenever you have new releases, whenever you have new features, whenever you have new bug fixes, it's dependent on customers to go out and do a new install or an upgrade to be able to take advantage of those. If there's a security issue, right, customers may not be ready to install the next version. So they're forced into this choice of, do I upgrade and take on the expense of doing that, or do I risk, the security threat? And, that's not a great choice for customers to have. With microservices, as we look at doing more and more of these, we see that we could actually deliver and make fixes in real time. We don't have to wait a month, 2 months, 5 months, 6 months to do that. We can do that on a daily or a weekly basis on whatever makes sense for the specific thing that we're working on. So like I said, even as we were developing these microservices, I could see pieces of these light up and become enabled within my production environment, and I didn't have to do anything locally. It was just because they had pushed something new up onto the server that day, and it suddenly appeared inside my Evoke install.
When you get to the point of continuous development, I'll bring up the same question again to see if that mirrors and is also part of the answer.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So decentralization is really about taking that control as an organization and pushing that down into your individual project teams. There are some times when you need centralized command over the application development, things for shared infrastructure. Things like saying, you know what, if you're going to use SQL Server as the database for your microservice, then we should all be using the same server or sets of servers and not spinning up a whole new server, right? You can share a server without necessarily sharing the database, so to speak. And so you may have some infrastructure pieces that you choose to share from a cost perspective, but from a data perspective and a microservice independence perspective, you allow the autonomy down at the project level. And then finally, automation, and we'll definitely dive into this here as then we're going to dive into some code. But automation is really about automating the entire deployment process. Now we use a continuous deployment set of tools. We actually use, for our microservice code, we use the Visual Studio Online and the actual Visual Studio Services for managing that. That means that when we push code up to GitHub, it will, very similar to the way we use TeamCity for our normal compilation and continuous integration. We use Visual Studio Team Services online to pull the GitHub code, to compile it, to run tests against it, and then once it's passed all the automated tests, then it goes into a state where it's ready to be deployed. Deployment may be push this to a QA environment, and we actually run, I believe, 3, maybe 4 different environments. We have a dev environment, we have a QA environment, we have a production environment, and we can independently deploy these builds to any of those environments, and we can say, oh, you know what, this has been through dev, and this is a critical fix, and it just needs to go straight into production, and we can push a button and it automatically gets pushed over. We don't have to worry about it's got to go through all these different hoops, right? Because at the end of the day, microservices is about doing things as fast as possible in a safe and controlled manner, and as long as you've got the safety checks in there, then that's what really matters. The part that I didn't talk about in the automation earlier today was really the thing that truly makes this possible, and one of the areas that is critical when you're doing this is that you need good monitoring in place. When you do a push, when you push something to production, you want to know, did this fail? Was there a failure during that push, or are we seeing abnormal failures in the production environment? Now, we use the telemetry data provided by Application Insights from Azure to do a lot of that monitoring for us, so we know instantly or very quickly something is going wrong in the production environment. And one of the nice things about Visual Studio Team Services is that we could actually roll back that production environment and roll it back to the previous version. You also have the ability, it's not something we've implemented yet, but within there you have the ability to segment customers and to be able to say, okay, we're only going to roll this upgrade out to 10% of our customers. And it may be a random 10%, or it may be based on geography or some other factor, but you could roll it out to a small portion of your customer base, see if it works correctly, if you're getting any errors, and then continue sort of that rolling upgrade for various customer groups until everyone is finally scaled up. This actually mirrors what companies like Sports Direct have been doing for a number of years, although not in a cloud environment, but they use this DevOps mentality to push things very fast in production and to have a method to roll back in the case of any errors, and to know that they can do that quickly and safely in the face of any problems in production. And I think that's, and so some of the best practices we talked about this morning, coarse-grained APIs. So when you're building out APIs, traditionally for in-process, you typically build things around CRUD with some finders and some other APIs to do some things. But you see a lot of CRUD-based APIs. That doesn't work so well when you're building out web services because of the added latency across the net and across process for these. So you build much coarser-grained APIs to deal with data in batches, both going in and coming out. You also keep separate data stores per service. So every service you write is not sharing those database tables. So if you have a user table in one service, have the same user table in another service. If it needed users, it would have its own user table. And you might use things like the CQRS pattern for sharing updates to that user data as they come into whatever service it is that's responsible for managing the user data. What typically you see is that other services only care about querying the data, and that there's one particular service that's responsible for managing the data. So you might have a membership service that is solely responsible for managing member data, and then other services may subscribe to events from that membership service so that they can get data to update their local store anytime new user data comes in. So that's a good example of keeping separate data stores. Deploying in containers or container-like environments. So we use desired state configuration in Windows Azure so that we can deploy to Windows Azure in a set configuration, very much like what containers provide for you. The ability to say this is the configuration, it needs this number of web servers in the front end, and it needs a database that looks like this on this type of VM or in this type of service, and it needs all of these different services to go with it. And you do that in a desired state configuration package. And then you should be building these services as stateless services so that they can scale. So that if you have a problem in a service, you just take that instance of the service down and bring up a separate instance. And you can bring up as many instances as you need, and you can kill them at any time. In fact, Netflix, who is a big proponent of microservices, has something they call a simian army, which is their test suite that they use. And one of the members of the simian army is Chaos Monkey, and they will run Chaos Monkey even against their production environments, and Chaos Monkey will just go through and randomly identify an instance of a service and just kill that instance of the service. And the whole point there is that it shouldn't matter if one instance gets killed. The system should detect that and bring another instance up in its place, and the system should be resilient to actions like that occurring. Because even if Chaos Monkey wasn't doing that, you could have some other failure somewhere that took that service instance down, and you need to be able to handle that. And that's an example where having a stateless service makes that much easier to handle. And that's also a great example of building for failure, which is the last best practice we want to talk about. So now that we've got all of that out of the way, let's jump into some code here a little bit and just talk about what this looks like in practice. And I showed a couple of examples. So the microservices that we've built for Evoke really provide two major endpoints to those microservices. One of those is a UI endpoint, and the other one of those is an API endpoint. And the UI endpoint is really how we deliver the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And ultimately, all of that gets packaged up. We actually use a tool called Webpack for doing that. There's also other tools like Browserify. You could use Grunt and Gulp as well, although Webpack does quite a bit more than Grunt or Gulp does natively on their own. But effectively what you want is the capability to take all of your resources, combine them, minify them, and end up with just one set of resources. So let's take an example. Now this is not bundled yet. So one of the resources we have is this thing called template resource. And this just basically took this index.html and it took this code and converted it into JavaScript into this template. And so now I have this as JavaScript, and I will ultimately pull down this JavaScript as part of this whole to-do list application. So all of this will get bundled and minified, and when it's brought down, I'll just have one big giant to-do list bundle that I bring down that's got all of my JavaScript in it, it's got all my HTML in it. If I have other dependencies, maybe jQuery and some other stuff, it may bring those down as well. It just depends on how you've set up Webpack for your specific use case. So when I bring all of those down, then that JavaScript in my UI is then free to call back into the API portion of my microservice to get my data. right? So I've got one part that does UI, and the API then does the data management for retrieving or storing of the data that that microservice is responsible for. In the background, there may be, behind this one microservice, there may be 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 100 different microservices that get called in the course of that one API call. So now this particular code base that I'm using doesn't use any authentication, but if it did, there would be a whole authentication handshake that went on behind the scenes. And ultimately, again, it's just a very little bit of JavaScript that gets called that drives this whole UI. So as I come and I look at my UI here, if I can get my machine to cooperate, come on, where's my doc?
Joe, one question that I had earlier from, and this is a good point for it, is to talk about dependency of external libraries and external things when we're talking about these microservices. You mentioned jQuery just a second ago, and that's a perfect example. In best practices, you know, that would be on the consumption side and the running side of it where you'd be loading jQuery, but is there a drive or an kind of a best practice intent that you try and limit the external libraries and the external services you're using so that there's not an external point of failure for your microservice?
Yes. So when I talk about having dependencies on some of these other libraries, part of Webpack, we actually make a decision whether we're going to bundle those in or whether we're going to take a dependency on some other loaded version. Now, something like jQuery, which we know is going to be there in the DNN case, we won't bundle that in with Webpack. Something like Bootstrap, which we can't guarantee, and we can't guarantee the version, we will bundle that in with Webpack, and we will namespace it so that our version of
is isolated.
Is isolated from any other version that might be loaded on the page, so that we don't have to worry about clashes between the UI that we're delivering and the UI that someone else may be delivering. So Webpack allows us to do a lot of different things like that, so that we can know that we can deliver these things in a way that works with everyone. But yes, we do try to keep that payload as small as possible and limit what those external dependencies are. Even if they're packaged in with Webpack, you still have to look at how much JavaScript are you bringing, how much HTML are you bringing down. Do you need all of that? Can you deliver some of that after the fact? Do they have to be in the first payload? Can they be in subsequent payloads? A lot of what we're doing that is not specifically about the microservice itself, but really a lot of these things are the same things you would do if you were building a SPA application, right? Whether it's in DNN or not. You have to think about those things. What does my first payload look like, and what do subsequent payloads look like? And what does it look like in an environment where I share responsibility for CSS and for JavaScript on the page, right? So all of those things you have to balance and figure out what you should package and deliver in custom namespaces, and what you should just leverage the shared resources for. So, yeah. So what I was going to show was the to-do list that we have here in this particular case. So this is built from that DNN module, and we can see an example. So we can build, and again, this is very heavily, in this case, because we've got a web front end, we've got a service back end using web services. This is a case where we use Ajax to call back to that back end service. Now this is this is actually a service running in the cloud, but I can just as easily run this same thing on a local install, and it'll operate exactly the same. At the end of the day, all of this data transfer is happening browser making an AJAX call to a back-end service that's running in the cloud and pulling that back down. So whether this website is running, quote, on-premise on my local machine or not doesn't really change that interaction pattern. And the nice thing about that I like about this pattern and the fact that that UI is actually embedded in the microservice is that it gives me the flexibility now that I don't necessarily have to take a dependency directly on DNN. I can actually run a microservice. So this is that same microservice. This is just a test HTML page. And if we looked at code, right, this is this page right here running up on the server, right, nothing to do with DNN whatsoever, but I can still get that same application. If I reload this, I'll see that Southern Fried task that I started earlier. So we can see that both of these are hitting that same backend, even though one's HTML and one's DNN. And if I pushed a change to this microservice, you would see that change, the UI change reflected in both places. Because again, even with the HTML example, there is no UI here. It's just a single div inside this page. The rest of this is all JavaScript, which is being used for pulling down the microservice here and executing that initialization of that microservice. So really not much to it. All of the UI that you see is all coming from the microservice itself.
Joe, a question in the room came in that mirrored, I think, at the same point from your session this morning, and it was to ask about the SEO implications of this and whether, with everything being loaded JavaScript-wise, you are hurting the rankings and the content that's crawled.
Yeah, so there was actually a good article, and I'll see if I can find it later and talk about it. There was a good article 1 or 2 years ago from Google itself. I think it was Matt Cutts over at Google, talking about SEO and JavaScript. And basically, his point was that the search engines have become very, very good browsers in their own right. And search engines nowadays can absolutely execute and absolutely do and will execute JavaScript on the page to figure out what the final rendered page looks like. So often when people are talking about, well, this is rendered in JavaScript, how are search engines going to be able to see and execute this? Well, they're going to do it the same way your browser does. They're going to run a JavaScript engine on the back end, run the JavaScript, see what changes it makes to the DOM, and then they're going to query that DOM. Given the prevalence of SPA applications that are out there today, it was something that they had to be able to do for. So are there any metrics or case studies to illustrate what degree we should lean on them? Nothing that I specifically looked at. I basically took Google at their word when they say that JavaScript doesn't matter to them in terms of showing content on the page.
Yep. Now,
having said that, remember that if you are changing state and constantly your JavaScript is rendering UI on the fly based on the user role and profile changes or state changes of the application, that's not something that your search engine is going to see, right? But for basic rendering of content, which is the part where SEO comes into play, there's not a problem with having that. So I would say something like a forum, if you've got a uniquely addressable URL for every forum post entry, where you could go and see a traditional forum-like entry, search engines are not going to have a problem with that. If you rely on some hidden state that's passed from page to page to page, then you're probably going to run into problems. So that's sort of where I would go with that. Are there microservices available in platform today? No, we're not delivering anything in platform today. We're looking at delivering some microservices in the future. I don't have a date on when that will occur or what that feature might look like. It's possible that some of the ones that we're working with now are going to come down to platform, but there's no final decision on that. But at the end of the day, microservices is just one more way of delivering content into your website. So whether DNN Corp builds it or someone else builds it, it is a delivery mechanism, right? So anybody could build a microservice to deliver what has traditionally been a module. And in fact, I would argue that there are some modules that would make awesome candidates for delivery via microservices. One of the primary considerations for using a microservice is, do you have issues around scale? Do you have issues where you want to be able to deploy features to customers very quickly and do so in sort of that DevOps manner? Then that's a great use case for microservices.
Joe, how do you see things like error handling and things like that in the traditional sense? In let's say a module context, you would have access to a lot of key platform features that you would rely on for troubleshooting issues and so forth.
Recording, if nothing else.
Are there any hooks into that type of thing, or how do you what philosophy is behind some of that?
So there are a couple of things. One is, I think you have to, if you're setting up microservices, and you're going to be going into that world, so whoever's running the microservice, that group or that entity has ownership and responsibility for delivering that in a way that's solid and reliable, right? So they set up the primary monitoring of that service to make sure it's operating appropriately. Then secondarily, depending on how your service is delivered in the platform, and we'll take a look at, let's take a good look at an example of that here. Where did it go? Thought I had, did I, nope. So let me just bring up this evoke site. So give me a second. This has got to spin up on a virtual machine, so this will take a second. There we go. And I'm just going to log in as a content manager. And there are also some various bits that are much like in SPA applications and other applications. You want to separate out and segment out sometimes how you're delivering different parts of your user experience. So in this case, I'm going to look at content as an example. So we should be coming down from the microservice. We'll see that render. Now I built out a content type called package type, and I don't think I've got all of the bits here that I want. So I could build out, so I've got, oh, I don't want package type, that's wrong. I want DNN package, that's the one I want. So a DNN package has a title We've got this thing called a package type here, and I'm just going to move this around a little bit. Let me just resize some stuff here. Oops. There we go. And I want to grab and do a body here. And we also want that to be text editor. And then I might have a couple of other pieces of information here. And we'll go ahead and save and close that. And we'll create a visualizer. Now a visualizer, I don't think I have one here for this. So a visualizer is basically just a bit of code that tells me how I can deploy or how I'm going to see this structured content on the page. So I'm just going to call this DNN package. We're going to do this on a DNN package type. And then my editor will load up, and we'll just leave this here. This is fine. We'll throw a div around this. Now this is using something called .liquid, which is a templating engine. Same templating engine that Shopify uses. And we chose that for a number of reasons, because we could easily embed this within the application, and it had logic and other advanced templating features that are not present inside of DNN's templating engine, and also because potentially this microservice may one day live outside of DNN, in terms of this may be something that we make available to WordPress or to DNN platform or to Drupal or to a number of customers. So you want to make sure that that the templating language you use is one that's not too DNN specific. So anyway, so I've got a template here for DNN package. And back to the question about from earlier, let me go ahead and create a page here. Downloads page. Oops, why did I not get a create add page? We'll just make that part.
It sounded like the setup for a joke, so I was like, no, what is? Tell me.
Okay, and now I can go ahead and drop what's called a visualizer on my page here. And that visualizer is going to use my DNN package content with the DNN package visualization. Of course, I don't have any content. Let's come back and do this again. Sorry about that. We'll come back. I just need to create some content here. So I want to create, I don't know whether I have any package types, so we'll create this as an install package. We'll publish that, and I'll create a new DNN package. And we'll go ahead and publish that. Okay, now let's come back in here and do this again. Now I can drop a visualizer on the page, package, of course. Okay, so I've got a bug here that I'm not seeing why I'm getting it. So somewhere in there I'm missing some data, but normally I would be able to drop this. And this whole visualizer is a module that lives on your page, and that has it has full access to the back end of code, right? So it can
Right.
call into the DNN API and do whatever it wants to do, log things in the DNN API, but it also can call up to the service as well to log things. And I'm not sure what's going on with my install because I actually had created all of those download pages, and I don't know if this is an old copy or what the issue is. But anyway, I think you get the idea.
Yep.
So, what is the?
You catching up on the questions in the chat?
A little bit.
Yeah, one of them was. Yeah. What was? No, there's tons of good heckling too, but that's to be expected.
Yes.
What's the difference between having services exposed in a traditional module and using microservices? Will, you're still online, so maybe clarify whether you mean security level concerns being exposed or if you mean resource level or what we're talking about. But what do you think, Joe?
Yeah, so this ultimately comes back to scalability issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so the services are not any different from an end customer perspective, i.e. a web service running inside a module inside DNN, you've effectively exposed that API for one customer on one website.
Mm-hmm.
And if for whatever reason you have to update that service, you have to generate a new copy of the assembly for that service. You have to get that assembly out to the customer, and the customer has to install that on their individual sites, which means some customers are going to be running on version 1, some customers are going to be on version 2, other customers are going to be on version 5. When you have a security issue, you really want all the customers to get advantage of fixing that security issue. And you fix it one time in one central location, and everyone gets access to it. You fix a bug one time, and you can push that bug out in the afternoon, the same day you fix the bug. You don't have to wait until the next version of your app before that bug actually gets resolved out in the wild. So that's really the difference.
Was, so this is the DAL as a service?
Not really the DAL as a service. This is really delivering features as a service. So you don't look at data access the same way, and you don't look at trying to deliver a data access. You look at trying to deliver a feature, a full feature. And that means the API, that means the UI, if the UI is part of that feature. Everything that makes that feature up becomes part of that service. And you're trying to deliver it in a way that you can update that on the fly at any time. And in fact, some proponents of microservices, they will do deployments into production environment hundreds of times a day.
There were thank yous for that. Thanks, Joe.
Yep.
Well, did you have any more demos or example things you wanted to jump into as we go through that maybe you didn't have a chance to look at in the webinar this morning?
Joe, I didn't see the WordPress example.
Yeah, I don't have the WordPress running. I didn't set up a WordPress site. Again, the WordPress is really, if you look at it, at the end of the day, is just loading jQuery and Knockout the same as before, loading a little bit of CSS for that to cover the fact that they don't have, you know, our standard DNN styles. But the rest of this is the same code. It's the to-do list manager, identifying the container you're going to load the UI in, and running initialization. And then there's this tiny little bit of PHP. I know, Will. I know. avert your eyes, a tiny little bit of PHP to render or to identify the short code so that you can use this snippet inside of your inside of your WordPress page. So
the main point being here, to rein back in some of the fun of the peanut gallery, is that when you're focusing on microservices as your delivery method for a solution and for data, and you've got DNN, as your power horse that's putting it all together, the consumption and the presentation of that microservice can be anywhere and anything. It can be in any other system. It can be in any hard-coded site. It doesn't matter at all what is running your microservice.
Yeah, and let's be clear, and I don't want to mislead anyone. DNN is not running anything in the microservice.
Right.
So nothing on the server side of this microservice. So if you look in this to-do list, there's no DNN references in this API. Right? This is just a web service API running up in the cloud that has access to a database, and we're exposing that through DNN, in this particular example, through a DNN module, but that module is really doing not much more than what this WordPress plugin is doing, or than that HTML page was doing. Now, in the case of the evoke example, and structured content and form builder and evoke, those actually have some deeper integrations in that web page side that integrates them back into evoke. And if we want to deploy those services into a WordPress site, then we would have to build some pieces, a plug-in for WordPress that provided some of that integration. Because in the case of the web services for evoke, or the microservices for evoke, we actually have some authentication stuff that is happening in the background.
So Joe, in the case that the service is not available, it's still up to either the module or the plugin developer, whatever the medium may be, to do something in that situation or to check its availability, right?
Correct. That's really not any different than when you're writing a single-page application style module and you call the API and you don't get a response, or the response you get back is no data. You're still responsible for figuring out, okay, what do I do in this case? Now, in the case of evoke, some of the things that we've learned, some of the things that we've taken advantage of, which come from having worked in the web service world for quite a while, is we do a lot of caching, and we store a lot of data on the DNN side, on the evoke side, so that if the data is not available there in the microservice, or the microservice is down, or we're not able to get retries come back in a reasonable amount of time, we can use some of that cache data. Or we can determine that the cache data is too old, and we'll throw up another type of UI on the screen to say, hey, this is what we're doing. And in fact, we actually, in the case, it's funny that you mentioned MongoDB, Will, because the structured content that we're running there inside evoke is actually using DocumentDB, Windows Azure. So we don't actually use a SQL Server on the back end of that service. We use DocumentDB and Windows Azure Search for indexing all of that content within the structured content feature for Evoke 8.5. The interesting thing is that we've been working quite heavily with the DocumentDB team, because content management actually lends itself really, really well to working with document type databases. So that actually is not far off the mark when you say writing for MongoDB.
Mm-hmm. All right. We are reaching time here that we need to kind of organize towards the end of our time here with Joe. Joe, did you have anything else that you wanted to try and run through, or demos you want to go back to or see if something loaded? Did you kind of run through the points you wanted to?
Yeah, I think we covered most of the items here. I don't think there's a lot more here to dissect. I mean, we could drop into code, but really it's all web service code. There's nothing too fancy about any of this. You know, so if you've written one web service before, you probably know what these all look like. They're fairly straightforward.
I had a small list of questions that I had either seen that were posted or chat, and we ran through those. I was amused to see that some of the same questions from the webinar this morning came back up again as well, and you got a chance to kind of recover or touch that ground again and talk about things. So I think most of the questions that I either brought with us or I saw from the community, we had a good chance to ask here. Clint, I'll just check in with you. I know we've been asking questions along the way, but did we miss any questions earlier on?
So Mark Busling asked one. David kind of responded to it, but you don't want to repeat it. You know.
What was that? What was the question?
Let me scroll back up. Yeah.
So one of our guys online, Mark, had a question that was?
Is the microservice accessing data in multiple different databases if it is being used on multiple different websites? Or does the microservice use only one central database?
So, Joe, did you hear most of that?
No, didn't hear any of that.
All right, so the question, to paraphrase, was about the databases for the microservices to access. If you have a microservice, is that accessing multiple different databases for different websites, or is it going to one central? And David's reply online was really that each web service is recommended to have its own data store. But maybe you want to elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, so we use, very much like we do within DNN Instance, we use multi-tenant database design within the service. So each tenant is assigned a separate tenant ID, and that there's a number of components that go up to make up that tenant ID, but then all of the data is segmented within the database according to that tenant ID. Now, there are some other factors that we use for partitioning data. I believe geography is one of them, and a couple of other things. So we may actually partition different customers' data in different data centers, but that's really a partitioning issue. But from a logical perspective, things are partitioned off of that tenant ID.
All right. I'm trying to not pay attention to the comments and chats, but also paying attention to them to make sure we bring up stuff. One good suggestion was there to have a microservices Ignite session at the upcoming DNN Summit to help get everyone excited about it.
Yeah, definitely. I've got a couple of different sessions ready to submit, but we'll get them submitted here for you, Clint.
Well, so Joe, thank you very much for spending this time with us. I'm glad we got a chance to ask some further questions and spend that time extended here from this morning. I know everybody who was online and here got a chance to ask questions, so I'm glad and thank you for coming on to the event tonight. Stick around with us if you would. We'd love to have you. If you need to run, it's what? Wait, it's barely the end of the day there for you, so you You still got another hour on the clock, right?
I've got a little bit of time I can spend.
All right. Well,
he
thanks.
has to stay because he's the reason that the new version of nvQuickSite is out. So.
Well, so we started off by skipping David and the updates on nvQuickSite because he was coming in. We've given him a pretty good chance to get connected, and I'm going to pass the screen over to you now, David, so that you can give us an update on what's been going on lately with nvQuickSite. There we go.
Can you guys hear me okay? Because I'm a little far away from the mic.
No, you are very close to the mic.
I thought it was like a big thing there. Oh, okay, good. So you guys can hear me.
You need to yell, actually.
You still should be loud, but still.
Hello, is this thing on?
It actually didn't make noise.
Okay. Nobody's responding, so I don't know if they hear me or not. All right, let's see. Show my screen.
He can code, but can he operate GoToMeeting?
It's me more.
Sure, okay.
I'm the one who has a problem with
Now my
operating.
There we go. So the this has been a few weeks ago now, but back in end of July we did release a new version of nvQuickSite, and I do have to take a minute to just give Brinkman some kudos on this because he did some great screencasts on this to show some key usability issues with the nvQuickSite. Well, not so much issues, but ways to improve it, and a lot of those we took into consideration and added into this version of it. So this was the primary focus of this was UX, and there was a new element to it that is just a starting point, but to be able to start tracking some stats on it and hook those into Google Analytics. So,
David, I apologize for interrupting, but just for a point of structure, just if anyone is running across nvQuickSite for the first time on watching this video later, I know we've talked about it and given some good introduction. Can you just back up 2 steps and tell everybody what nvQuickSite does, how awesome it is, and why, and then we'll...
Well, of course it is awesome because we created it, right? But no, I'm just kidding. The nvQuickSite is really for anyone that needs to stand up an instant install. By stand up, I mean install an instance of DNN in your local environment and do that very quickly without having to really understand the ins and outs of all the various things associated with installing, such as file and folder permissions, database configuration, and IIS configuration, and all that. So we like to tout that it's a 1-minute install process from start to finish. That your mileage may vary based on the speed of your computer, but it's a very quick process to set up in a DNN instance. So if you need to know more about it, there's a lot of interesting details out there on nvQuickSite.com, and this is an open source project, so you will find it on GitHub at github.com/envisionative/nvQuickSite. You'll find all the instructions there in the wiki, and also if you want to be involved in any shape, form, or fashion with either posting issues, some enhancement requests, or just conversations around it, please do so under the Issues tab there, and there's a full documentation under the wiki. Thank you to Will Stroll for that and for maintaining that. So the latest release here was a minor release focused on UX, and I'll just go through it very quickly so you guys can see it in action. And I'll try to point out most of the stuff that's changed, but if I miss any of them, just let me know. So I'm going to start up nvQuickSite here, and you'll notice right away, and no, it does not run on Mac, Mr. Brinkman, not yet, but if you would like to build an Electron app for that, you could certainly do that. You might have a little trouble with the database engine and all that, but yeah. So from here you'll see that there's a considerable amount of change made to the UI. Actually, it's fairly subtle on the button, but the actual experience itself is a lot quicker now. So if I wanted to install a DNN Instance, I would choose the version that I wanted to install, and let's just choose 7.3.3 because I don't think I've downloaded that one before. Used to, you would have to choose, you would have to actually download that and go through some screens and so forth, but now we just click Next, and if it's not been downloaded before, it just starts downloading it, and it will populate this and advance to the next screen right away. So we really got away with 3 clicks on that screen now, and that's pretty impressive. I'll show you a situation. Actually, if we had already downloaded it before, you will still get the prompt on whether or not you want to download it again or if you just want to use the package that is already downloaded. On this next screen, it looks a little bit different now. We've broken up the site name into 2 separate fields. And the main reason for this is a lot, especially if you're in development or you're in QA or something like that, you tend to use the same extensions for your URLs. So that's one of the less primary fields here, or secondary field, that you can put the dot. I use .local a lot, so that's what I leave in there, and I won't really even have to touch that field unless I'm doing something special in there. But all I do is put my site name in at this point, and this is the last one that I had done, so I'm going to change this to 32. Now when I change this, you will see, be watching the install subfolder, you'll notice that it changes at the same time this does. That way I do not even have to type in my subfolder. So we've added this concept of, most of us use a base folder location for our installs for various things. So if you have a product and you're you're a module vendor and you really need to stand up an instance real quick, chances are you're going to have all of your DNN instances in one folder, or root folder I should say. And what this other field here is it's just going to create that subfolder for you. So now I do not have to go through the process of browsing for what folder I want to put it in and to create that folder manually and so forth. So all I did was change the site name, and I'm going to click Next at this point, and it's going to tell me that it does not exist. This is a new dialog that we created. It's a custom dialog that will allow you to create that folder if it doesn't exist already. If I would have entered a name that does already exist, a folder in that root folder or base folder, it would not prompt for this. So you'll notice there, once I answered that, it automatically advanced to the next screen. So again, we changed the clicks in that situation only down to 2 clicks. So that was pretty good. 3 clicks on the first, 2 clicks on the second. And here you'll notice that it looks exactly the same as it used to. However, the database is automatically populated with the site name. And this is usually fine for most people, so if you don't need to change that name or anything, or you don't have some other naming convention, you can just leave it right there, and then we can get away with just the next click at this point. So down to 1 click on this screen, now we're through the install process, and it is now copying everything over and setting up all of your IIS settings, your database getting created, and all the user configuration for the database is being done for you. And here in just actually, I was thinking about the timing. We used to say less than a minute, but I haven't done any timing since these UX changes have been in place. I bet it's probably down to about 40 seconds would be my guess.
Under a minute for sure.
Now we're ready to visit the site, and it automatically closes the app, so you don't have to worry about that as well, and it's going to spin up the DNN instance. So yeah, we're excited about the changes, and if you see other areas of potential improvement in this, please do post an issue out there. Does anybody have any questions?
Just take away that button that says visit my site. Go straight to it.
That's a decent idea.
Let's click.
It can definitely be done.
I like that it finishes and that you don't go anywhere, because like what if you walked away and you come back, you see, hey, I'm done.
Well, if it's on the site, it worked. If it's not, it didn't.
That's fair.
For those
That's
online,
fair.
I saw somebody couldn't hear Clint. He was saying that we could get rid of that visit site button at the end and just open
Launch
the
it.
site.
Yeah.
I guess that would be okay, unless there's an error and then we don't do that.
Auto do that.
How about it goes ahead and logs you in as host right away? Right, you finish,
That would be great,
bam, you
but,
just log right in.
Yeah, we'd have to have screen scraping software and all kinds of stuff like that. So, yeah.
Okay. David, thank you for going through that review of what's new in nvQuickSite. I think we're coming up on 8 o'clock here, so we're going to try and wrap up this particular session of the Southern Fried DNN user group. We've got a little bit of housekeeping we have to do to wrap up this session. I mentioned early on that our sponsor for the meeting was JetBrains, and we are thrilled to have a couple of giveaways that we want to extend both out to the online community and the folks that are here with us tonight. David, how do you want to do that? Do we have raffle tickets? What are we about to do here?
Well, I was sitting here looking at our list of attendees, and I believe
we're down to 2 folks.
Everyone, I think,
Do we have stuff TJ on though?
Maybe TJ and Cheryl.
Sure, absolutely. Sometimes you enter a contest and you get lucky because you had great odds or there was just random luck, right? Sometimes you luck into a prize or a reward just because you are determined and dogged and stay through a whole DNN user group session. So I think that by the average of the fact that many of us have already won and had these wonderful items, this license from JetBrains.
You know, I did hear from Grant though that I think you weren't able to get the entire suite, right?
No, you have to pick a specific tool. Yes, you do.
One now.
You can't do the other now? I'm not complaining at this point.
Well, I guess my point is if somebody wanted another tool, then it might be okay to win it.
To win it again?
So, yeah.
Well, I believe for tonight's session we have officially done the polling and the raffle of the results, and online visitors Cheryl and TJ are our winners for JetBrains tonight. So what we need you guys to do is 2 things. Number 1, here in the comments of this meeting, please give us your name and email address so that David can reach out to you and get you an email with the information here from JetBrains, because you're going to have to grab a code from him to complete that. So we'll need an email address. If tonight's session goes by and you miss reaching out to us, or vice versa, we miss you, email us at info@southernfrieddnn.com, and David just posted that into the chat.
I think they should have to turn their mics on and say something so we know they're not robots.
We'll make that a requirement next time.
Just for a second.
Just for a second. All right.
Pop in and say your name.
Well, thank you, everybody. We just to recap on tonight's fun session. We started off with information from Cassidy. Yeah, thank you. Perfect, though. We started off with information from Cassidy, the committee and the team behind DNN Con, and that organization has been working hard. It's behind-the-scenes work that not everybody gets to see, and not everybody even hears or knows about things that are going on. And so we got our first update from Cassidy on the upcoming DNN Summit in January 2017 in Denver, Colorado. There's going to be a lot of exciting stuff coming forward in the next few months, and so we will continue to check back in about that. Joe Brinkman brought to us more information and a good Q&A deep dive session on DNN Microservices. So we thank Joe for participating and joining us for that. And then David, of course, gave us that short update on nvQuickSite. We will be having our next session. I always need to bring the calendar up for this before I get started. Our next session is the 3rd Thursday of every month. So September, that makes it September the 15th is going to be our next DNN session. We have a presentation coming to us. We're going to be focusing on DNN and Azure related information. So Michael, that might be something that you're more excited about paying attention to. So we'll try and bring home some more information about that here, and let everybody know as soon as we get the full bullet point list of what we're going to be going through. If anyone has new information, new module releases, community information that you want us to get out, please share with us by emailing info@southernfrieddnn.com. We'll be glad to pick that up, investigate further, and invite more folks on for our next sessions. With that, I say thank you, everybody, and good night, and we'll see you soon.